Welcome to Beyond Names. I'm Dr. Habib. This is a space for spiritual seekers and soulful misfits, for the curious and the committed, for those grounded in a tradition, and for those who are not sure what they believe. Whether you call the divine God, Yahweh, Allah, Elohim, Hashem, Brahman, Great Spirit, higher power, or you're still searching for language that fits, you are welcome here. Together, we'll explore the intersection of spirituality and daily life, the wisdom of many traditions, and the ways we return to our true selves, to our source, to the light that each of us carry within. I'm so glad you're here. Let's begin with introduction of our conversation partner for this episode, Mark Silver. Mark is a fourth generation entrepreneur who has run a distribution business, turned around a struggling nonprofit magazine, and worked as a paramedic. Mark is the founder of The Heart of Business, and he is the author of Heart Centered Business: Healing from Toxic Business Culture so your small business can thrive. As a coach, a consultant, a mentor, and spiritual healer, he has worked with over 4,000 businesses since 1999. Mark is on the board of directors for the Horn Farm Center, which focuses on educating people in the region on regenerative agriculture. And his own home, a 15-acre property, is slowly being turned into a food forest to contribute to the local food shed. To learn more about Mark and his work, please visit heartofbusiness.com. Mark, welcome. Thank you for being here.
I'm delighted to be here, Habib. Thank you so much for having me.
So I've warned you that first question is if you would please introduce yourself to the listeners by way of telling your spiritual story.
It's an interesting question because I don't think of my life I don't have that as a set answer. So let's see what comes out.
Great.
Um, I grew up in a Jewish family in outside of Washington, D.C. in Maryland, and always thought I was going to be a rabbi. And I had I didn't really have a lot of connection to spirit within the synagogue, but I remember at a young age feeling connected.
Hmm.
And then through the process of growing up, um, uh, as a man, as a boy and then as a man, I really got shut down, bullied and all that
Hmm.
stuff with patriarchy and way men are treated. I just, I remember just shutting myself off, just closing down emotionally.
Hmm.
Um, I started to I spent time doing in the punk rock scene out in DC, and I spent time in a lot of activism. Um, it was Rock Against Reagan in those days, and then eventually doing kind of abortion clinic defense and a lot of pro feminist kind of activism.
Hmm.
And my spirituality had always kind of like peeped out here and there
Hmm.
through like high school and college, but not in any kind of formal way or any way that I knew how to even be conscious of.
Hmm.
Um, there was I the real openings for me beginning wise were I came out as bisexual in 1988, and when I moved to the Bay Area in 1992, my wife Holly, we've been together for 30 years.
Hmm.
I met in the Bay Area, but I was also very active in queer community there, and the Radical Fairies, if you know about them at all, were it's like it was the first time I was starting to melt my emotional self open because I
Hmm.
was around men that I didn't feel threatened by, that would actually smile and were friendly and weren't like I didn't feel like I was under threat
Hmm.
or competition, which is what I felt through my whole childhood. And
Hmm.
and there was a lot of earth-based spirituality there, and then also
Hmm.
intersecting with Jewish community
Hmm.
um, at the same time, queer Jewish community in the Bay Area with Holly.
Hmm.
and meeting Holly there. And so there was like such an opening with all of that. Like I like felt myself being opened. I felt myself being much more free. You know, we were doing Shabbat regularly and doing a lot of the singing and a lot of the praying and could feel the connection. And it was, but I still was still undoing a lot of the masking that I had done. It
Hmm.
was really, there was a lot of unwinding that was needed for me. And Holly had been involved with Starhawk's reclaiming path um, in the Bay Area, which is kind of, you know, neo-pagan, uh, earth-based witch camp. She was involved with witch camp, and it was just so freeing to have so many ways of expressing a connection to the mystery, you know, to the oneness, to that. And then it was in the process of all of that, we're deepening in our Jewish path, and as we found that we were in a serious and then eventually a lifetime commitment with each other,
Hmm.
um, is when we came across Sufism. And it was a very interesting time because we were regular with um, our Jewish community, and there was a
Hmm.
teacher in the Jewish community. And then I'd also met, you know, we share a Sufi path, you and I, Habib, and
Hmm.
we'd met Ibrahim, and Ibrahim was teaching. And so they were both teaching the exact same thing week by week. They were
Yeah.
like, it was like echoed in this really wild way. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that's weird. And
Yeah.
but I but something in the transmission for me, the Sufism w was touching me more. Like I could feel it in a more embodied way. There was something that was being broken
Hmm.
open for whatever reason. The
Hmm.
divine was opening me in that particular way, you know.
Yeah.
And And it was really quite extraordinary. Like I had all of these abilities opened up, really kind of wild abilities. I remember we decided to go to the Sufi healing school. I remember working with this. I was like, I had like, you know, at the time you know, uh, I had recently quit being a paramedic. I'd been a paramedic in the San Francisco Bay Area for years. And,
Hmm.
um, And so I was still steeped in my medical knowledge and like this medical intuition opened up. You know,
Yeah.
I was in classes and I could see people's EKG rhythms. I could see what was going on in their lungs. I could see I was like,
Wow.
that's wild. I could see auras. Anyway, it was it was really quite extraordinary. And then um it all got taken away. Whoosh. It's like, well, you don't need that
Uh-huh.
anymore. And so all of that kind of sight was just, you know, just disappeared, but I was connected. I
Yeah.
was left connected. It was like, oh, that helped me connect and trust. I think that was part of a gift, the divine gift that
Hmm.
I can trust my connection.
Yeah.
And then there was a point where I was really struggling between the Judaism and the Islam of
Hmm.
Sufism. It
Hmm.
was like fighting inside me. I remember in the very beginning bringing my Jewish prayer book to the mosque and doing my Jewish prayers in the mosque and just like
Yeah.
and then I had this quite extraordinary experience in prayer one day where I don't normally hear really clear language, like my knowingness often
Hmm.
comes as a knowingness or a feeling sense, or sometimes I'll get images, but this was
Hmm.
like language. And I just heard super clearly while I was in prayer, you're loving the path more than you're loving me.
Yeah.
And at that point, internal struggle I had between Judaism and Islam just dissolved. I saw
Yeah.
that it was the same thing.
Yeah.
And all of my internal struggles around that just kind of melted. And it was shortly after that, I can't remember the timeline exactly, but it was shortly after that that I guess it was a little while after that. Well, I'm getting out of order because I was going to say I took Shahada, but it was before I took Shahada, I took like a formal conversion to Islam. reversion of whatever language you want to use. Just the commitment to like, oh yeah, I'm embracing this. I had been given a Sufi name by the Sheikh. In Sufism, there's this, and a lot of spiritual paths, you get given a spiritual name by the teacher that's meant to help open you and help you on your path and help you see things about yourself. And it's the same in our Sufi Tariqa.
Right.
And I had originally been given the name Jamil, which means the beauty of God.
Mm.
And I never felt a strong connection with it. It was funny because other people had gotten the same name. They'd be go, "Oh yeah, this." I'm like, I don't know, that doesn't sound like me. Um, but I had gotten it because uh, I had taken hand with Ibrahim. I, declared my commitment to the path through Ibrahim,
Mhm.
and he had called up our sheikh who was in Jerusalem and gotten names for people who had done that. And then Sidi, our sheikh, came to the US as he did once a year, and I
Mhm.
visited him at this building, the Lake House. It was this it was a large multi-family house, but it was relatively small gathering area. And
Mhm.
they said, okay, who wants to retake their commitment? Retake the promise, the bayat, their commitment now that the sheikh is here. And I just felt myself yanked forward, like as if on
Mm.
a cord. And
Yeah.
And I was the only one. I was the only one. I took hand with it, which is really unusual. Normally, there's a number of people that are in the in that commitment circle, and I was the
Yeah.
only one who took it. And this is so cute. This is so cute. Um, because after I finished, CD looked at me and said, "You are Abdul Aziz." He changed my name from Jamil to Abdul Aziz, and Ibrahim, who's the American teacher who had given me the name, turned to CD and said, "His name is Jamil." And CD says, "I know this. He is Abdul Aziz." And when he said that, when he said that name, I don't know how else to describe the feeling I had, but it felt like every cell in my body changed.
Mm.
And I started this long journey. Aziz is an Arabic word which means the divine quality of strength. There's different
Yeah.
divine qualities, divine quality of love and mercy and compassion, strength, wisdom. There's 99 of them in our tradition, 72 in the Jewish tradition. I don't know how many in the Hindu tradition. Anyway, there's this idea of understanding the qualities of God. And mine was the divine quality of strength. And so it just started a long journey for me with the divine quality of strength and what that
Mm.
really means.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. So it's been um, it's been a really beautiful journey. I went through the 3-year healing school. I went through the teacher training. I was faculty for the teacher training. I got my master's of divinity. Um, Spirituality has become kind of an organizing. So weird to say it like that. It's just like just like an awareness of the source of love.
Mm.
And so, yeah, there's lots of stories and things from there, but it's like there was like a real, like the journey that ended me onto the path. And I've had lots of struggles with the path. I know that the divine placed me here, and I don't really have a lot of choice, but I have a deep love for all the different ways that the divine has created the human being. As it says in the Quran, I've created you in different communities and different people so that you may know one another.
Mhm.
So many different ways to appreciate the mystery and the divine, and they're all carrying messages of oneness.
Mm.
And for me, that's been so central. Um, because right
Yeah.
now the community that I lead, it's a business community, and we teaching business, but it's spiritually centered, and we have people from all the different paths and all different kinds of humanity, and different countries, different races, different spiritualities, different genders, different orientations, and so just my studies in regenerative agriculture and the natural world, just, like diversity is, we find the oneness in the multiplicity and the multiplicity in the oneness. And there's so much love to be discovered in all the differences.
Mm.
And yeah, probably a good place to end. Could keep going on and on, but I'll stop there.
Uh, well, it's a good place to stop. So talking about the multiplicity leading us to oneness and the multiplicity being a reflection of oneness. And honestly, it makes me think about the situation I'm in right now in my neighborhood, where there's not necessarily a real appreciation of multiplicity or diversity.
Oh dear.
That's certainly what it seems like, based on some of the interactions I've witnessed, some of the things that I have heard said, and
Hmm.
some specific situations that I won't go into now.
I'm sorry.
So I appreciate that that's a part of your path, and I'm curious around regenerative agriculture. Would you be willing to speak more to kind of that, how your spirituality, your spiritual journey intersects with um, regenerative agriculture, and maybe even
Yeah,
start with what regenerative agriculture is?
yeah. So there is this understanding that um, nature, which humans are a part of and not separate from, um, uh, is like a wondrous um, interdependent systems that
Hmm.
all feed each other.
Hmm.
And what humanity has done is we've made the mistake to think that we're separate,
Yeah.
and we've made the mistake to think that we can control, and we made the mistake to think that we can do it better than, the millions of years of hundreds of millions of years, billions of years of divine guidance in the evolution of the living systems of our planet. And so regenerative agriculture leans into the way things work, if you will, you know. Um, so, for instance, instead of trying to, like if you go into a forest, into a healthy forest, which there's not that many examples of because there's been so much damage done, but if you go into a healthy forest, there's a diversity of plants and they communicate with each other and they support one another. And so, for instance, when you plant a fruit tree, the way that the non-regenerative way is, of course, to like rows of trees, one single kind of tree in rows to have an orchard. But a more regenerative way is to plant a tree and then surround it with other plants that support it, and plant a
Mhm.
different tree and then surround it with, called guilds, and kind of recreate the living system, not even recreate, just allow for the
Mhm.
living system of the forest to,
Mhm.
to be there. So that's an example of food forestry. But regenerative agriculture. Another example is someone um, uh, not taking out more than you put in, so that if you're growing things that,
Mhm.
again, you're not doing a monocrop, but maybe 55 or 60% of what's being grown goes back into compost, goes back into the land, and you're harvesting less than half so that it
Mhm.
can regenerate. So that, it's
Mhm.
like when you put a seed in
Yep.
the ground, it's not the plant that grows isn't coming from nothing. It's pulling nutrients from the soil. And if you
Right.
just keep harvesting
Right.
without replenishing,
Right.
eventually it becomes empty. And replacing the fullness of a rich ecosystem with very specific scientific um, uh, fertilizers, many of which are dependent on petroleum, you're not going to have the same health. Healthy plants resist. damage from bugs, healthy plants, healthy systems of plants, resist, resist predators. Of course, some get eaten, but I'm finding myself particularly articulate in the moment. Um, I'm a teacher of business. I'm not a teacher of regenerative agriculture. I like engaging with
Sure.
it, so I'm not always so articulate in teaching it.
Hmm.
But it's because I don't. I participate and I learn and I support the horn farm in the ways that I can. But but yeah, but it's like, oh, it doesn't have to be so hard. We don't, it takes a tremendous amount of energy. Systems of control take a tremendous amount of energy, whether it's colonialism and white supremacy and sexism and homophobia, or if it's fascism, or if it's monocropping agriculture. Takes tremendous amounts of inputs to get outputs, whereas you can have a natural diversity of humanity, a natural diversity of people, a natural diversity of plants,
Hmm.
and we support each other, and it's all much easier, more joyful, and more supportive. I'm not saying there aren't challenges. I'm not saying it's, a second Garden of Eden, but it can be so much easier than we make it.
Hmm. So it sounds like taking the model from how nature works in a healthy system and then seeking to follow that example, basically, of what you find in a healthy forest. And yeah,
Exactly.
okay. So since you did say that what you teach is business, let's talk about the intersection of spirituality and business.
Yes.
Yeah. Um, tell me more.
Well, so I think the first thing to understand, there's a lot. I mean, tell me more. There's a good book on it. There's a lot we could go on for a while, but the first thing I'd like to say is that um, capitalism is not the same as business. The propaganda around capitalism, it likes to say that it's kind of like, oh yeah, it's natural and this is how it's always been. But the truth is that human beings have been doing trade and commerce as long as we've been around. There's evidence that's thousands of tens of thousands of years old of like trade that happened between, far-flung settlements of human beings, finding things from the coast, hundreds of miles inland. And
Mhm.
and there's many, many, many different forms of trade and commerce that human beings have indulged in. And capitalism, um, which is the concentration of wealth and capital, the ownership, the private ownership of the means of production, if you will, um, into very few hands, has only been around for a few hundred years, and um, and it has ushered in um, a devastatingly toxic and destructive way of being on the planet, um, which we are reaping the harvesting the toxic harvest
Mhm.
from,
Yeah.
environmental degradation, colonialism, cultural destruction. Um, Human beings have done terrible things for a very long time, but it's been so accelerated in such a terrible way. And
Hmm.
capitalism, this extraction of wealth without any awareness of where it's being taken from and no care for where it's being taken from, um, is a primary cause. I won't say that it's the primary cause because colonialism and white supremacy and sexism are all kind of intertwined with capitalism. It's all kind of like these systems of domination
Hmm.
that crush our souls and break our hearts and separate us one from the other, instead of us recognizing that we're all one and we all need each other. We all need to care for each other and care for the most vulnerable out of obligation um, to our creator. Um, and so business, when I think about healing business and changing, and working in business, it's not about bringing the divine or bringing love to business. It's about recognizing that it's already there and we have to stop covering it up. Um,
mm,
in Sufism, we talk about how the only power that the self has is the power to cover over the truth. And so we
mhm,
just have to stop ourselves from covering over the truth that there is love in everything. At Heart of Business, in my business, we like to say every act of business can be an act of love. And that's what we're that's what we're bringing out. And so instead of a lot of approaches to spirituality and business are what I call the gas tank approach, where you go fill up on spirituality and then you go do business. And
mm,
then when you get empty, you go fill up on spirituality again. And instead, one of the things that happened for me in the healing school is I was being shown, I was seeing
mhm,
how these esoteric spiritual teachings were embedded in some business practices and not in others. And so the very practice of business can be a spiritual practice. Can We can be nourished in the act of doing business, in the act of expressing love and allowing ourselves to be filled with love,
mhm,
letting it be another place where we can um, be in praise of the mystery and of the
mhm,
source of love and of Allah, and be in appreciation and care of the divine creation and the divine creatures, and be caring for one another in that way.
So how is it that you support businesses and business owners and executives and so forth? How is it that you support them to do
We beat them over the head until they get it. No.
that? Yeah, somehow I don't think that's
No,
the answer.
no. Um, so we do a lot of I mean, we're an education company. We do
Mhm,
coaching and we do healing, and at
mhm,
the heart of it, a lot of it is education. And so we teach a different way of like a reframing. So like for instance, one of my favorite examples, when we work a lot with marketing because that's a big place where people struggle. It's not the only place we work, but it's one of the main things that we look at. And
mhm,
when we talk about um, marketing, a lot of if you study marketing at all, everybody talks about like speak to the pain points, speak to the problems, speak to like where people are struggling.
right.
And the way that it's done currently, it's done in a re-traumatizing way. It's like push on the pain
Mhm,
until someone is so activated that they are desperate to relieve that, and the best way to relieve it is to purchase. This is what is done in our current economic system, in our current marketplace.
mm,
It's pokes at our unfulfilled needs and desires and
mhm,
says like, oh, if you want love, if you want sweetness, if you want beauty, you got to buy this car, or you got to drink this alcohol, or you've got to whatever it is.
right.
Um, these false promises, it's like trying
Mhm,
to quench thirst with a glass of sand.
mhm,
But the answer is not to not talk about problems, because people struggle. Like that's usually what happens is people are so grossed out by this toxic form of marketing and sales that they go to a different extreme and say, okay, I'm not going to talk about problems. I just want to inspire people. I just want to speak to the beauty that's
mhm,
evident. But the challenge is that there's a lot of things people are struggling with. And when we're struggling with something, we can't take our attention off of that. And the response is usually like, oh, what you're saying sounds really nice. I'll get to that as soon as I handle whatever problem I'm facing.
mhm,
There's a hadith Qudsi, which is a quote from the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salam, and the hadith Qudsi is one that's attributed directly to Allah, as if the divine had said it. And the quote is, I was a hidden treasure and I yearned to be known.
mhm,
And so I created the creation in order to be known. And so, because we are expressions of divine presence, we carry that yearning to be known inside ourselves as well. Being
mhm,
witnessed, being seen, being known is such a deep source of healing for us. And this is at all the different levels. And so if we can speak to something that somebody is struggling with while seeing them as a perfect human being who is, a divine creation, but they're struggling, people can feel seen in a way that allows them to take a breath, that doesn't activate them, but
Hmm.
helps them actually take a breath and slow down and feel cared for.
Hmm.
You can say, like if someone's a chiropractor, let's say, and someone has a back injury, you can say, like, if you've had a back injury and if you don't get this fixed, you will never pick up your kids again, and and it'll be terrible, and you'll be bedridden, and it'll be a terrible life for you. You can say versions of that. I'm hyperbolizing, but people, go there. And so it's like, oh my God, I'll never pick up my kid again. I better get help.
Hmm.
Or you can say, when you hurt your back, it's really painful. A lot of things feel out of reach. And you probably have the sense that your body can heal. And you know what? It can. There's so many different ways to heal. And I'm one of those people who likes to help people heal from this because I want you to be able to access your life again. You can see like there's a witnessing there that isn't a poking. There's a witnessing there that lets them know that you're not like the only answer, that there is a natural ability to heal. But it's recognizing like, yeah, a back injury is debilitating, it's devastating. And that care allows someone to take a breath and feel some sense of healing, whether or not they buy from you. If we do this in all the different aspects of business, bring that sense of care. And it's, like there's different teachings and different things, whether it's in sales or whether it's like you're invoicing or whether it's creating a system. Like there's so many different teachings that come out in different aspects of business that
Hmm.
help us to recognize like, oh, the divine is present here too. Oh,
Hmm.
love is available here too, even in the invoicing, even in the system, even in the website, even in a difficult client interaction.
Hmm.
And and we can let go of control and we can be in a place of surrender and connection and
Hmm.
love. And the business can be successful in this way. But I'm hoping that was clear.
Yeah, it's a great way of thinking about it, and one that I haven't thought about in that way before. So it's great to hear that approach. And if only we all, if only all of us would approach all of our lives, not just business, not just marketing and sales and systems and websites, but if we would approach all of our lives with that love and care, and based on this recognition of the sacredness in each of us, and based on this commonality of the desire to be known. Yeah, yeah. So does that also inform your activism? You mentioned earlier activism.
Hmm.
I know that in your story, it seemed as if it was part of your youthful days. Um,
Well,
is
I don't, I'm
activism could continue to be a part of your journey and a part of your spirituality, or?
so I think it's important to understand that in the doing the work of liberation, doing the work of undoing systems of supremacy and domination, and trying to help a more beautiful, sacred world come forth in the many different forms that it can take.
Mhm.
Um, activist is one role. There are many different roles we can play. I am no longer 20 or 30 or 40 years old. I'm getting closer to 60 than
Mm.
and I'm I'm happy to go out to a protest, but I'm like frontline activist isn't my main identifier in liberation work.
Mhm.
But understanding liberation work and understanding how we care for one another
Mhm.
is deeply woven into the heart of business and into regenerative agriculture and into our lives because without um, Yeah, because none of us are free until we're all free. We all get free together. And there's the divine has created all of us, every single last one of us. And if anyone is left out, if anyone is shut down, if anyone is enslaved or harmed, or kept from expressing the the fullness of who they are, we're not honoring the sacred. We're not really seeing the law. We're not really knowing the divine.
Hmm.
If women are, like the prophet said, take half your religion from Aisha. It's like if
Yeah.
women aren't held in complete equality with men
Hmm.
in all ways. If we don't recognize the diversity of gender that we've seen, if we don't recognize the diversity of sexual expression and the way that love is expressed, if we don't recognize um, the commonality of human beings and the differences between all the different cultures that Allah has created,
Hmm.
and the different ways of knowing the divine that have been birthed in different places and I forget the number. What is it? Like 160,000 prophets sent to the every human culture and every time. With it's like all of those have created different ways of connecting to the
Hmm.
divine. But almost any path that I've looked at has the five pillars in it, connecting to the divine multiple times in a day, understanding, you know, that there is a oneness that we're all a part of.
Right.
Giving, alms, giving to care for the people. Um, uh, Having some kind of fast, some kind of um, um, uh, practice of deprivation that allows us to remember how dependent we are on Allah and how much people who have less, to bring out compassion and empathy for them. And
Hmm.
there's, what spirituality and path doesn't have some kind of a pilgrimage, some kind of a spiritual journey that allows our hearts to unfold in beautiful
Right.
ways. Islam
Right.
has its own version of that I follow, but there are many different versions of it, and it all helps us come back to the oneness. And
Mm.
so understanding that is, I think, for me at the heart of my embrace of the work of liberation, of freeing ourselves from the tyranny of the ego of human beings who have decided that they should have sway and domination over other human beings and over the world. And, it's not right. The divine is the just, and we're meant to receive and fill up with and express that quality as well as the others.
Mm. When you talk about liberation and these systems of domination, um, we're, it goes without saying, we're living in a time where the struggle between the light and the dark is especially strong. It's especially intense. And we're seeing a lot of that, what you talked about earlier, those systems of oppression, the systems of domination. You talked about the interlinking of those with capitalism. And do you have any advice for how to navigate the, like what to do to care for yourself and care for others in these times that we find ourselves living in?
Ah, there's a few things that rise up for me
Hmm.
in response to that. One is grief work. We
Hmm.
have to grieve. There's so much to grieve. There's so much pain. And grief is something that Western culture is kind of phobic. It's like afraid of
Hmm.
grief. It's one of the
Hmm.
things I love about the Quran. It's like you're only here for a minute. You're gonna die. Contemplate on death. It's like understanding grief, and I don't just mean the death, but that like all of the losses, the
Hmm.
losses of biodiversity and the losses of species, the losses of, the losses of joy, the losses of freedom. People, here in our country in the United States, watching immigration kidnap people off the streets and kill them, and it's like that's a grief work. Not only grief work, but it's part of
Hmm.
it.
Hmm.
Um, And then related to that is joy. Like
Mm,
if we don't preserve our ability to dream, our ability to imagine, the ability to be joyful and celebrate, I don't
mm,
mean in a way that shuts us down or putting on rose-colored glasses or pretending what's not happening, but we have to also see the joy because that's what feeds us, you
mhm,
know?
mhm,
Um, it's um, it's a medicine for our hearts, and so holding on to our joy, I think, is beautiful. And then the third thing that arises for me is understanding what your gifts are and what your skills are.
mhm,
Um, I talked a little, very little bit. There's someone, Deepa Iyer is their name, Deepa. Iyer, and they developed this map of what do they call that map? It's just a map of the different roles that one can play in liberation work. There's many different
mhm,
roles.
mhm,
There's organizers, there's healers, there's storytellers, there's frontline activists, like there's a lot of different roles. Like what gifts do you have and what's the role that you
mhm,
want to play? And then finally, the final thing that arises for me is to not recreate the wheel. A lot of people, especially white people that maybe haven't been involved or people that haven't been involved in activism or organizing or liberation work in some way,
mhm,
just may not be aware that there are a lot of organizations and groups that have been doing the work for decades. You don't have
yeah,
to recreate it, you know? Um, uh, you can find an organization nearby and then knowing the role that you want to play, plug in that way. I love regenerative agriculture. I'm volunteering on the board there, and I'm
mhm,
bringing my intersectional understanding of liberation work as well as spirituality to that context, you
mhm,
know. So, if you're going to want to do anti-racism work is something that's deep in my heart, as well as pro-feminist work and
mhm,
queer liberation, like bringing that to food security and regenerative agriculture. I mean, it's like, oh, my heart just gets happy, you
mhm,
know,
mhm,
being present like that.
yeah,
So I think, grief, joy, find your role, and then find an organization and connect. Um,
yeah. Great. Good advice. Good advice. Yeah. Um, my sort of as I sit with that same question and often after doing an episode, I'll ask myself, well, how would I have answered that question if someone had posed that question to me, how would I have responded? And so it's like each episode is an opportunity for me to reflect. And and often I think that we must tend to our own hearts, which is what you're saying with the with doing the grief work, but also recognizing your joy, recognize your gifts, and then making connections with others who are doing the work. Part of that is also connecting to that which we hold as holy, or that which we hold as sacred, or that which we hold as it's our connection with the oneness that allows us to be present in the multiplicity. And without losing our joy, without losing our capacity to care, without losing our ability to get up and engage for justice. I feel like that's what strengthens us and feeds our hearts and our minds and bodies and sustains us and allows us to move forward. So
Inshallah.
yeah, inshallah. And then also the importance of as you said, the organizations that are doing it, connecting with those. I think it's so important to connect with others. I'm a big proponent of interfaith activism and community activism,
Mm.
and if you can, like look at the organizations that are doing what you're passionate about, but also look at organizations and individuals that are outside of your identity and cross over and engage in the common cause with people, um, because then that helps us again realize our interconnectedness and our oneness as opposed to the illusion of our separation. So thank you for all your ideas that have that resonance. So, and thank you for the
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for holding such a beautiful space and thanks for inviting me in and letting me share my heart in this way.
Yeah, yeah. And thank you to all listeners for joining us on Beyond Names. Before we go, if you would pause briefly, pause just for a moment to reflect on this conversation with Mark and to see what stays with you from it. May something you heard today help you reconnect with the light in your own heart. May you grow in compassion, clarity, and courage and joy. May you find your way again and again back home to yourself, back home to the divine, however you name it. If today's conversation spoke to you, please like, share, and comment on this episode. Please follow and subscribe to Beyond Names. To make an appointment with me, please visit habibburger.com. To learn more about Mark, it's heartofbusiness.com. Until next time, may you be light, may you consciously participate in growing your light, and may you share your light. Peace be with you.